This morning's scripture is from Genesis 35. It's verses 9 through 15, and it is the Common English Bible. It says, God appeared to Jacob again while he was on his way back from Paddan Aram and blessed him. God said to him, your name is Jacob, but your name will be Jacob no longer. No, your name will be Israel. And he named him Israel. God said to him, I am El Shaddai. Be fertile and multiply. A nation, even a large group of nations, will come from you. Kings will descend from your children. The land I gave to Abraham and to Isaac I give to you. And I give the land to your descendants after you. Then God ascended, leaving him alone in the place where he spoke to him. So Jacob set up a sacred pillar, a stone pillar, at the place God spoke to him. He poured an offering of wine onto it, and then poured oil over it. Jacob named the place Bethel, where God spoke to him. Respond with me, please. We thank you for the word of God within us and for the word of God among us.
I was checking my watch. It's about 10:33. We're doing great. I got half an hour to preach. Y'all know I speak too quickly for that. All right, let's pray. Gracious God, I thank you so much for your presence here with us and your presence here within us. And we ask now that this word and this message that has been prepared would be of you and from you. And we ask that our hearts and our ears and our lives would be open and ready to receive whatever it is you have for us this day. And we ask it in your name. Amen. So in the 1800s, there was a man by the name of Reverend Theodore Parker. He was a Unitarian minister who served in West Roxbury as well as in Boston, and he was an outstanding abolitionist of his time. In fact, he led several public demonstrations that nearly led to riots, and what they were protesting was the Fugitive Slave Act. It was the mandated arrest and return to slavery of the black men and women who had freed themselves and had gone north. His public actions and his organizations of the public protests were so effective that Massachusetts as a state stopped trying to actively enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. And he spoke in an 1810 sermon. He said, look at the facts of the world. You see a continual and progressive triumph of the right. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice. This particular quote from his sermon led Martin Luther King Jr. several years later to quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. There are things that take time in our lives, right? Restoration in particular is one of those things, and justice is not something that's instantaneous. We work at it. We shape our future, and we try to make it bend toward justice. And the thing is people are no different. Do you know anyone in your life who is like instantaneously like the person they need to be? Any of y'all been working on somebody for a long time trying to... Some people take longer than others. We have been talking over the last couple of weeks, we've been telling stories of improbable leaders, people who may not have been our first choice to lead, our first choice to problem solve. They are not even close to perfect, not the most eloquent or morally stable or honest or someone we would even consider choosing as a role model. These are people with a long arc over their lives, but they were in the right place at the right time with the right skill set to move forward God's kingdom. So today we are talking about the story of Jacob. Now Jacob is the son of Isaac and Rebekah, and he has a twin. Everybody remember the twin's name? Esau, yes. And he is trouble from moment one. He and his brother wrestled in utero, which I can only imagine what that must have been like, and he is born gripping the heel of his brother. And Jacob and Esau, they couldn't have been any more different. Jacob was really more of a quiet homebody, probably tended to the shepherding business, and he was a mama's boy. Esau, on the other hand, was a hunter, a little bit more hot-headed, and he was Dad's favorite. You can see we've already started at odds here. Now, they were starting to wrestle a bit over the birthright. This was something that was entitling the firstborn and giving them certain inheritance rights. They got a double portion of the material inheritance. They received family headship, the spiritual leadership of the family, and then they were also entitled to Dad's deathbed blessing. It's a big deal. Esau, as the firstborn, is entitled to all of this, but has no interest in it. So he comes home one day, he is absolutely famished. Jacob's in the kitchen making some stew. I'm sure he's an excellent cook. It smells delicious. And Jacob says, hey, I'll sell you your birthright for a cup of stew. Esau, not so interested in the birthright, thinking he's going to die because he's so hungry. Anyway, if you've been so hungry, I think I'm going to die. Esau's like, fine, you can have it. Gives away his birthright so that he can have this stew. And we start to get this idea that perhaps Jacob might be a touch conniving. There are moments in our marriage when Josh and I look at each other and we try to blame each other for what we see in our kids. Things that they've picked up from us, and we go, unfortunately, it's usually my fault. I go, yep, that one's mine. And so as we watch this, we wonder perhaps where might Jacob have picked this up from? Let's keep listening. As his dad approaches his death, 137 years old Isaac is, it is time to give his deathbed blessing. And so he's getting ready to give it to Esau, the firstborn. Sends him out, says, go on hunt and prepare me a delicious meal because I don't want to make any big decisions on an empty belly. Esau goes out. Rebekah overhears this. Now, she loves Jacob more. She's pretty obvious about it. She wants him to be blessed. So she says, hey, you go out, you go get the 2 goats and bring them in. I'll cook it for your dad. In the meantime, go and get your brother's clothes. Put them on so you'll smell like your brother. By the way, your brother's really hairy, so get some goat skin. We'll put that on your arm so we can pretend that you're his brother. And she sends him in for this blessing. And Isaac buys it. And he blesses Jacob instead of Esau. And as you can imagine, Esau is furious. And so he plots to kill his brother, and Jacob flees. As Jacob is fleeing, he stops for the night to take a sleep, and he dreams of a staircase or a ladder. Anybody remember, we're climbing Jacob's ladder, the song? Yeah. We don't know what it's about, but we know we're supposed to climb the ladder. And in the midst of the dream, God offers a blessing to Jacob, and let that sink in for a moment. Jacob's not exactly been a model citizen here. So far, he has deceived his father and betrayed his brother, and he's on the run. He's not really asking for a blessing. He's not really seeking God, and yet he receives this blessing. God says, I'll give this land to you and your descendants. Every family of earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. Your family will be so big it will be spread out everywhere. I am with you. I will continue to be with you, and I will protect you. It's a giant blessing for someone who's not really been the best citizen thus far. And he wakes up, and he recognizes that God has been in this place because he knows who God is, has a bit of a relationship with God, and so he anoints the space and renames it Bethel. And he makes this commitment. If God is with me and protects me on this trip that I'm taking and gives me bread to eat and clothes to wear, and I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. This stone that I've set up as a sacred pillar will be God's house, and of everything you give me, I will give 1/10 back to you. God has met Jacob where he is, and he promises to go with him on the journey. I don't know if any of this sounds like a familiar blessing to you. Remember, his dad was Isaac, his grandfather was Abraham, and it's I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob becomes the one through whom the whole lineage follows through. But let's continue on with the story. So he gets to Haran and he meets Rachel, and Rachel is a family member, and he offers to work for Rachel's dad. And the dad asks him to stay on what his wage might be. And Jacob says, your daughter Rachel, she's awfully lovely. I'm pretty interested in this one. But Laban says, fine, no problem. Work for me for 7 years, and then you can have her. And Scripture says something to the effect that he works for 7 years, and it felt only like a day because he was so in love with Rachel. And he gets to his wedding night after these 7 years, and he wakes up the next morning and realizes there's been a switcheroo. He's actually now married to Rachel's sister, Leah. The conniver has been connived, and he's not pleased. And this feels a bit like the start of a great mini-series. This is the spot where you go, well, to be continued. The drama's through the roof. The story doesn't end here. Laban says, well, hey, if you really want Rachel, you got to work another 7 years for her. Gee, thanks. What a great wedding gift, right? So now Jacob is married to both Leah and Rachel. So you can imagine the sibling rivalry. So Jacob obviously loves Rachel more. Now we have to take a second. We have to set aside equal rights. We have to set aside women's liberation and the Me Too movement. We have to remember we're reading about a time where the women are second-class citizens at best, property at worst. So what do you do in a world where the only way that you can count is if you have a baby boy who will continue on the lineage? You have babies! So we let the pregnancy games begin. Here we go. Leah gets pregnant first. She has 4 sons. Certainly Jacob will choose to love her because now she's not only had the babies, she's had the sons. But in the meantime, Rachel figures out she can't get pregnant. And she gets jealous, and she says, hey, I've got this maidservant here. Have some fun. I like this translation. It's great. So she offers her servant. The servant has 2 sons. Leah gets jealous. So what does she do? She says, hey, I've got a maidservant too. 2 more sons. Then Leah herself has 2 more sons, and she has a daughter. And then finally, Rachel, the beloved, has a son. She has another one later, but this is the son. But this is the ticket. This is where Rachel has finally earned her status in Jacob's family. And Jacob feels like he can finally take her with him. But when Jacob approaches Laban, her father, he convinces him to work for him for a bit longer. He says, how can I pay you for this? And Jacob says, after all of my years of service are done, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take all the speckled and the spotted sheep and female goats and all of the black male lambs that are left in the herd. I will take that with me as payment. Laban says, great. But sneakily, he goes in, he removes all of the animals that fit all of those particular characteristics, gives them to his sons so that when all of the ones that are left breed, they won't have any of those characteristics, leaving him with nothing. The conniver gets connived again. But wait, there's more. Jacob, either knowingly or unknowingly, discovers the rule of recessive genes, enhanced by the blessing of God. And so when the animals come to breed, they actually give birth to speckled and spotted animals. And Jacob ends up with this giant, strong herd. And Laban has this weaker, smaller herd. So the conniver connives the conniver who connived him, and it's getting a bit ridiculous. And Jacob decides to leave, but instead of telling them that he's leaving, instead of telling Laban that he's taking his daughter with them, they go sneakily away in the night. And so Laban chases them, and it's the height of the conflict between Jacob and Laban, and there's all this other drama that happens, but finally they agree to a truce. So Jacob and his family take leave, and soon thereafter is where Jacob has his great wrestling match. You remember Jacob wrestling with the angel? Yeah, wrestles all night long, won't give up. And finally, as dawn is about to break, Jacob demands a blessing. I will not let go until you bless me. And it is here at this point where Jacob's name is changed from Jacob to Israel, which means one who has wrestled with God and won. Jacob is renamed again 2 chapters later He is again given the name of Israel, but this time without that connotation of wrestling with God, and instead this time about leading the nations forward, being the father of the 12 tribes of the many nations. And it's interesting, we know a lot of bits and pieces about Jacob's story, mostly Jacob's ladder, the wrestling match, or occasionally a few other spots. And there's a lot more to Jacob's story. But where I think we often really remember hearing the name Jacob is as Joseph's dad. Jacob in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, anyone? Go, 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 Joseph. Right, he's got 11 brothers. And eventually, those 11 and Joseph turn into the 12 tribes of Israel. All of the Israelites are descended from those 12 brothers. This conniving, crafty opportunist who is sometimes embittered and angry, even unto the point of occasionally being unethical. This Jacob, he is the one who gets to be the father of the 12 tribes. He is the one through whose bloodline the lineage gets to continue. And I think sometimes we stop and we ask, why? Why has God chosen to bless someone who has so clearly been misguided for so much of his life? We act a bit like the older brother in the prodigal son story who sit back and go, I've been here the whole time. Why are we blessing this one over here? What does this particular improbable leader have to teach us? You can get ahead by being a crafty opportunist? Double check to make sure it's your beloved before you say, I do? Staying 2 steps ahead of your competition yields financial gain? Being at the right place at the right time yields God's favor? What Jacob teaches us is that God's grace and God's blessings have absolutely nothing to do with what we do. They have to do with who God is. And this isn't an idea that's original to the New Testament. It is something that is shown to us from the very beginning, that God has shown that God offers God's love to those who have no other claim to it, to those who have done nothing to deserve it, to those that the world thinks aren't the right kind of people, to those who think they are the right kind of people, to those that we don't want to have it or to those that we don't want to give it to all the people at all the times and all of the places. God's grace and God's blessings are offered. You know, it took an entirety of Jacob's life to feel like he had finally received God's blessing, but I wonder if it wasn't really there all along. God has always been. God is still, and God will always be a God of grace. Our job is simply to accept it and run with it. Amen.